Good evening, YouTube. You guys are now watching another segment of the Cali Effect. Today we're going over the Phantom Knight Speedracer deck profile. Really hoped you guys enjoyed what you saw in the Duel video. If you guys did not see the Duel video, you can obviously click on this annotation right here and watch it. It is an amazing game. So for the people that just clicked on the link because it was like, what is Phantom Knight Speedroid? This deck uses exactly 0 Burning Abyss monster in the main board, and it is a deck that is extremely explosive. The deck could have came into fruition a long time ago, but it wouldn't have been as good. But with the limitation of Beatrice, I feel like this deck can thrive, mainly because Beatrice can't necessarily be a centralized combo at one. I don't know, this deck just has a lot more explosiveness, and it has more outs to the opponent's outs that they would side for this deck. Let's get into the deck profile. By the way, it did go X2 at a regionals. Alex Wiener, he decided to drop because he went X2. He still could have topped, obviously, but he wanted the top 8, and he was like, I'm not going to get X2 with a top 8. And it did go undefeated at a couple of events because this deck is nasty, I'm telling you guys. 3 copies of Phantom Knight Racket Gloves. This and the other Phantom Knights are obviously the most important part of this deck. Without this, the deck would not be able to function. Main reasoning behind is because Racket Gloves allows me to send any Phantom Knights cards from my deck to my graveyard. That includes the trap cards to be able to special summon themselves for a free rank 3 play. 3 copies of Silent Bloots. This is another card that makes it tick. Reasoning behind it is because it's a free rank, rank 3 monster if you already control a Phantom Knight monster, and if it's in your graveyard, you can banish it to add a Phantom Knight's spell the trap card from your deck to your hand. Most importantly, you get to add Fog Blade, which is a walking fiendish chain, awesome card in itself. 3 copies of the Phantom Knight's Ancient Cloak. Ancient Cloak is a very good card for this reason. It allows you to search your Phantom Knight monsters in your graveyard, or I'm sorry, from your deck to your hand. Its other effect, I believe, you can target one dark monster on the field, change this card to defense position, and if you do, that monster gains 800 attack and defense until the end of your opponent's next turn. I just read that effect off because I rarely, and I mean rarely, use that effect. I actually forget it almost every single time. But ultimately, I think it's a really good card, good for getting over big beaters, and just really good for searching, and it has a Phantom Knight name. That's it for the Phantom Knights. To be honest with you, the other Phantom Knights out right now are not that great, mainly because they're not 3 or they don't necessarily help the strategy in the direction I'm trying to go. Now for the racers, the Speedroids. 3 copies of Speedroid Terratop. Terratop is essentially a free rank 3 play. If you control no monsters, you get to special summon it, add one of your 2 copies of Speedroid Tankenborg to your hand, special summon that, and then make a free rank 3. The reason why this is so pivotal into the deck is because the more free rank 3s you can make, the better. This deck has all the access, practically a toolbox of rank 3s to make, and this card helps it. It also has a Speedroid in its name, and we kind of abuse that too a bit, as well as it being a wind attribute. The Tankenborgs, you get to special summon it if you control a wind monster. Keep in mind that goes in fact for Leviair or any other wind monster you would control, such as Totem Bird. You could just special summon it and then make a free rank 3 if you already have a level 3 monster on your side of the field. So it's pretty good for that. Then 1 copy of Speedroid Tri-Eye Dice. That's the other wind monster that we do play. If it just so happens to be in your graveyard, you can negate a monster's attack. It also is a tuner, which helps us make Synchro 6 and 9 plays. Also a really funny thing to help you get out of the flying sea. I'll tell you guys that in a bit later. That's it for the Speedroids. Now, me and Alex Wiener were talking, and he was like, name it Speedracer, and I was like, why? Because obviously you have the PKs, which are the Phantom Knights, the pilots, you have the Speedracers, or the Speedroids, which are the cars, and then in Speedracer, it's always something to come out of the trunk, and they're normally fluffy animals. That's how he described it. So for the fluffy animals, this actually isn't a fluffy animal, but it's searchable. So Edge and Sabers, card is amazing. It's a free rank 3 if we put a card to the top of our deck. It helps us put cards to the top of our deck that we don't need or want to the graveyard when we make a Dante. And on top of that, worst case scenarios, I've actually had this scenario a couple of times. I had no targets for boots, and I needed to banish to make a Leviair play. I had the Fog Blade in my hand, which I just drew. I stacked it to the top of my deck, special summoned the Edge and Saber, activated the boots, searched the Fog Blade that I just stacked to the top of my deck, then made the Leviair, had an extra free monster, made a Break Sword, and then just completely blew my opponent out of the water. This card is amazing, and it's searchable in this deck. 3 copies of Fluffle Wings, pretty pivotal part to the deck. It's not a level 3, which I guess that sucks, but other than that, it is amazing, allowing us to draw extra cards from our additional deck. And then 3 copies of Fluffle Bear. It searches the Toy Vendor. Toy Vendor is God in this deck. And then it fuels the Fluffle Wings. That's it for the theme monsters. We also run 2 copies of Kagamusha Knight. I feel like this deck, or this card, helps meld all of the cards, or all of the strategies together. For example, if I draw like a dead Fluffle Bear and the Kagamusha Knight, well, I can still make a rank 3. All I have to do is normal summon the Fluffle Bear, special summon the Kagamusha Knight. Same thing for Speedroid Tri-Eye Dice, or any of the Speedroids that isn't Terror Top, and any of the Phantom Knights if I just draw Phantom Knights. So it really helps me advance my game state into making a rank 3 play. It's also searchable by reinforcement of the army. That's it for monsters. At 24, at spells, 3 copies of Toy Vendor. If it's sent to the graveyard by milling, you get the search. You get the pit cards to our graveyard by discarding. This card is everything you would need inside of this deck. It allows us to discard cards from our hands. It allows us to search. It allows us to draw cards with the Fluffle Wings play. This card is just godly. 2 copies of Speed Recovery. Now, this card is another awesome card for this strategy. If we mill it off and we have a Tenkan board in our graveyard, we can just banish the Speed Recovery we can just banish the Speed Recovery and at the Terror Top if we have that in our graveyard, and that's a free 3 play, or rank 3 play. If we have to try dice that we milled off and our opponent Flying Seed us, banish the Speed Recovery, at the Speedroid Tri-Eye Dice, summon it, and then make a card with it. Most importantly, it's just an awesome card. If we really want to go into our plays and we mill off the Speedroids, it allows us to special summon our Speedroids to our side of the field and then just go off. It really rewards us for milling Speedroids, or just milling this card and milling a Speedroid. 1 copy of Soul Charge. If you open this card, it's nutty. Like, this card is so unfair in this deck, especially as longer as the game goes on and you have all of your cards utilizing your graveyard. This card is just amazing. Foolish Burial. I think there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are 5 cards in this deck that I just probably wouldn't want to have in the graveyard. So Foolish Burial is a really good card for sending any of my monsters. I think there's 22 of my monsters that I would want in my graveyard. Reinforcement of the Army. All of the Phantom Knights are searchable by Reinforcement of the Army. I run 11 targets with the 3 of each Phantom Knight and then the Kagamusha Knights. That's it for spells. At 8, at traps, 3 copies of Phantom Knight's Fog Blade, the Fiendish Chain of the deck, and you can banish it to get a free Phantom Knight to your side of the field. This is the most awesome card in the deck. We also run 3 copies of Breakthrough Skill, another effect negation card. My reasoning behind it is this deck does a really good job at sitting on a Dante, a Totem Bird, and then still being able to search the Fog Blade. So if you have a Fog Blade, a Skill Drain, a Dante, and a Totem Bird, more often than not, your opponent just can't deal with all of that negation. And I felt that effect negation was probably the second most important thing other than monster destruction in this deck. So I decided to keep in the 3 Breakthrough Skill. Also has a really nice graveyard effect for getting over stuff like Infinity. The last is 2 copies of Phantom Knight's Wing. I was running 1 wing and 1 sword, but that sword is so bad. Like, the sword is terrible. And my reasoning behind the sword being terrible is because it has to remain face up on the field for it to prevent your Burning Abyss card or your monster from being destroyed. Wings, it isn't susceptible to Twin Twister Rate. Twin Twister Rate, you could just target your monster. Congratulations, once per turn it can't be destroyed by battle or card effects. I thought it was a pretty good trade-off for being 300 less points. The only downside to that is with the sword, it's a different Phantom Knight's card name, so you can special summon 3 monsters with all your traps. Whereas opposed to me, I can only special summon 2, but I don't really need 3. That's it for the traps. For the extra deck, 2 copies of Phantom Knight's Breaksword. I don't want to say you're not going to miss 3 in this deck, but I am so pushed for room. And on top of that, I don't miss 3. If you play the deck, if you play the game correctly, if you play all of your outs correctly, you won't miss 3 of this. So, you know, you have plenty of other destruction outs, plenty of other ways to get over your opponent. So don't use this card recklessly. But most importantly, being able to a walking Scrap Dragon that special summons monsters and steps up your rank 4 play is amazing. I would want to run 3 of them though. I wouldn't lie. 2 copies of Dante. I run no Burning Abyss cards, so 3 copies of Dante seemed a little too much, and I'm gonna give you the perfect reasoning why. Dante recycles Dante, so after my second Dante and my opponent gets rid of it, oh, Dante effect, put Dante back into my deck. free recycling. The next most important thing is that I only needed to send 6 cards, so I really only need 2 Dantes. By the time I send 6 cards, if everything's right, I should have enough to get going. Don't get me wrong, I would love to send 12 cards, but you know, sometimes it is what it is. 2 copies of Leviair. This card is almost obvious. It allows me to special summon any of my monsters banished, and then more often than not, it sets up a lot of nasty plays. 1 copy of Ghost Trick Alucard. This card is nasty in itself, especially when you use it with the Ragged Gloves. It gets to be 2800 attack and destroy face down. Also a really good card with some of the cards that we're citing. 1 copy of Super Quantum Mech Beast Gampros. I dropped this card for the Nightmare Shark. I regretted not having this card. This card is awesome. I love it. Being able to destroy spells and traps in the form of a monster, just too good. 1 copy of Totem Bird. You only need 1. But if you open the Totem Bird combo, your opponent isn't going to make up for that. Like, it's just really hard to get over a spell negation and a monster effect negation. For the 4s, we play Maestroke, which is the card you could take out for the Nightmare Shark or whatever, the Break Sword or whatever else you need. Evil Swarm Nightmare, and the Dark Rebellion. The reason why I run the Maestroke is because in a situation I don't want to make Nightmare, which is a game winner, and I don't want to make Dark Rebellion, which is a waste if you just make Dark Rebellion. You can make a 2800 beater if you're using the Ragged Gloves collectively. Monster that can flip opponent's monsters face down, and twice in a game it can't be destroyed by card effects. So this card is awesome. I just really loved it. The last Exceed monster we play is number F0 Utopic Future. Card's just amazing. Being able to snatch cards that can't be targetable. If we have a threat that we can't get rid of, I make this card. 1 copy of Coral Dragon. Coral Dragon allows us to put our cards to the graveyard. It's also a synchro monster. It's just awesome. This card, you couldn't ask for less for this card, especially when it's sent to the graveyard. We get the draw card. It helps replace itself. And then the 1 copy of Trish. When my opponent gives me a Flying Sea, I get really nasty and Trish them. For the side deck, I run the 2nd copy of Speedracer Tri-Eye Dice. So this is the theory. My opponent chooses for me to go first, or you know, whatever. However that happens, I choose to go first. It doesn't matter. I special summon this. They chain Flying Sea. So now I have a Flying Sea on my side of the field. With Speedracer Terratop, I'll add the Tri-Eye Dice. I'll summon the Tri-Eye Dice. I'll use their Flying Sea, my Terratop, and my Tri-Eye Dice to make a Trish. And then they'll lose a card from their hand, the Flying Sea, obviously, and if it's in any game, or if it's any other later game states, they'll lose a card in the graveyard as opposed to just a Flying Sea, and a card on the field. So they just really, and I get to open up my board again for rank 3 plays. So they really just lost just by giving me a monster to use. It becomes such a minus for them. 2 copies of System Down. This is for ABC. Like, there's really nothing else to say. This card is just a blowout against them. Maxi, I like to draw. I don't side anything against PK variants except for Maxi. I just feel that confident in the matchup. For Disruption, we run 2 copies of Twin Twisters and a Galaxy Cyclone. Could easily run a 3rd copy of Twin Twisters. I like Galaxy Cyclone because I can mill it off and still gain effects. 3 copies of Swords Against Sealing Light. This deck does have a bit of a problem with dealing with a whole bunch of big monsters. So against Blue Eye, Swords Against Sealing Light is a really good thing. It also works really well with Ghost Trick Alucard. And then lastly, 3 copies of Anti-Spell Fragrance. This is for Pendulum decks, and sometimes I just like to lock the opponent out of the game, and I play the Simorgh too. Simorgh is awesome in here because you run dark monsters, you run wind monsters, so if you mill it off, you can summon it, and this is a complete lock from your opponent's setting cards, period. Thank you guys so much for watching another segment of the Cali Effect. I hope you guys really enjoyed the Phantom Knight Speedracer deck profile. Please like, comment, subscribe, but most of all, enjoy.